Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Healing Vibrations podcast. My name is Trevor. I'm a sound and energy healer, and I'm really excited today to do this episode because one of the most sort of influential people that I've met on my journey that's helped me just at the right time is someone I'm going to introduce you to shortly. In the meantime, if you like this podcast and you like the other podcasts, please get in touch and also subscribe. And if you'd like to be a guest, also just email me. All the information is at the end of this podcast. So, this episode is Don Roberto, who is a shaman, a healer, and much more than that. So I'm really excited to introduce him. So without further ado, hello, how are you doing?
Hi Trevor, how are you?
Okay, I'm good, yeah. So it's great that you've accepted this invitation, and I'm looking forward to the next hour of learning more about the journey and also sharing your journey with other people. I think I met you about 8 years ago when I was just going through my dark night of the soul, and I didn't know anything about plant medicines, and so you showed me a whole new world of experience and tools, which I am forever grateful. So yeah, welcome. And whereabouts are you at the moment then in the world? Because I know you travel, or used to travel a lot, but I know you're starting to do that again.
I'm in Madrid at the moment. I'm actually in the family home. I'm from London originally, and in normal conditions, I'm based in Taiwan in the Far East. But I'm peripatetic. I move around, nomadic. I do the work where I'm called to do the work. Plus, I spend a few months under normal conditions in Peru training. So yeah. Right.
So yeah, it's like I said earlier. I met you about 8 years ago, and I was in need of some intervention, and the universe brought our connection through a mutual friend, and you were telling me about plant medicines, and the word ayahuasca came up, which I didn't know what it was, but since then it's become very popular, and so many people I meet now in lots of different countries that have been introduced to their spirituality really through that, and it's not for everyone, but we can discuss about that later. It's all about timing, and also I think, as you'll agree, the medicine seems to call to you. So yeah, if you could explain to us what exactly is ayahuasca for the people that are uninitiated in this.
Well, ayahuasca is basically a combination of two plants that are found in the jungle, and when they're combined, they can be assimilated into the body, and essentially you get a doorway, an opening, a portal into higher dimensions. Plus, you get the presence of those plants, their intelligence, their consciousness that accompany you on this journey, and are able to heal you and teach you and enable you to let go of the things you don't need. So, why it's becoming so popular is because, in a sense, we're in a time where we need. We cannot solve the problems that we are facing from within the situation within. We need to kind of go at a different level to be able to get a different perspective. And I think that's what the plants are trying to do, is say, look, this is what you've been doing, you humans have been doing so far, and this is where you've got to. So it's not really working. So we really need to bootstrap you into a new level of awareness, consciousness, so that you have a different relationship to nature and to yourselves. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a tool. It's a tool to assist in this journey, really. And I know when I first participated, it was extraordinary to say the least, and probably still the most extraordinary night of my life. I think that's never going to change. Well, I say never going to change. You never know on this journey. Things keep happening every year. But from going from 0 to 100, that's the level. Once you drink this as a tea, and the space is held. So we'll talk about that shortly. But then, as soon as I went into that, this information just flooded into my consciousness, and it was an activation as opposed to an awakening. There's a difference there. It was an activation, And
So what's the difference for you, though? This is a good exploration of terminology. What's an activation and what's an awakening for you?
an awakening, I think, is, let's define it as something that you are suddenly awakened from a sleep, and then you have to learn lots of information. The information is new. As an activation, it's similar, but the fact that the information is already there, I've already done this work before, and so it's reactivating who I am.
Okay.
And that became evident during the sessions, whereby I recognized you, I think in the second or third. I went, oh, we've done this before. I saw who you were. I saw my past lives. I recognized at that time that I've been in this space before. And over the last 7-8 years, I've even now becoming to start accepting who I am, who I really am, not who I think I am. So it's a deconstruction of who you thought you were, and allowing that other side of you, the real you, to come forward. So that's why I felt it was more of an activation for me as opposed to an awakening. Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with you very much that in many ways it is a deconstruction, because who we are, our notion of who we are, has been a construction. It's been a social construction, a cultural construction, a family construction, a bunch of stories that people have told us about who we are, our gender, our clanship, our national identity, plus the stories we've told ourselves, and they're not necessarily correct. So often the wisdom of the plants say, look, you don't need to carry this story anymore. It's not who you truly are. You're something much greater than this story. Stories are great for defining who we are. They give us a point in time and space to orientate in the world, but also at the same time as helping to guide us, they can constrict us, because they can stop us from growing because we identify too closely with those stories.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so much of that, of who we think we are, that's actually been programmed. And I don't mean that in a conspiratory way. I just think from our environment, from the people around us, and ourselves, who we consistently tell ourselves who we are and who we're not. And there's a fear that if we let go of who we think we are, then we don't exist. Who are we? Our life will, and ultimately, I think that's the journey where we all seem to be on, to realize that we are more than we think we are. And, whatever the modality, the intervention is that happens, I think that ultimately is our journey. So how long have you been doing this work?
This work with the medicine, I've been working with it since 2008, February 7th, 2008. The lead up to this was an interesting story because, as you can imagine, I was based in Taiwan, which is a way away from Peru. And somebody on Facebook wanted to add me as a friend. So I looked at that. Like back in the day, you could randomly, ask people to be friends and based on your interests. Not so much these days. And I looked at his interest and it said shamanism and ayahuasca. And I went to myself, well, I remember reading about ayahuasca 20 years previous to that. So hang on. So what's this guy in Taiwan doing with ayahuasca? So I wrote to him and I said, what's the story? And he said, we have plants that do the same thing in Taiwan. So the same week I met another guy who didn't know this first guy. And then we had lunch together, and then he said, hang on a minute, I've got a present for you. And he leaned down into his briefcase, and he pulled out this vial of brown liquid. And I thought it was coffee. So I said, I don't drink coffee. And he said, no, it's not. It's ayahuasca. So I had two people in the same week in this tiny island off the belly of China, both saying, hey, ayahuasca. So I went, hang on a minute. So the first guy got back in contact with me. He said, look, we're going to do a ceremony in Chinese New Year. Do you want to join us? And it was like, you've got to be stupid not to read the signals. This has never happened to me in 20 years. And then suddenly in the same week, two people who don't know each other both approached me and offered this to me. So that's when it began. And eventually, 6 weeks later, I prepped up according to the protocols, and I went in, and I had a stinking cold. I thought, well, this is the worst day to do anything like this. So we were actually by the sea in a house, and they put tents in the garden. And so these guys actually knew nothing. I mean, they knew how to make it, but that was about it. They had no real experience. Having said that, so I drank it. It was terrible. I felt terrible. Half an hour later, I was purging, and I went outside to the garden. I was purging in the flower bed, feeling very guilty. And I turned around and I looked at this guy, and his head was on fire. Like they were like these flames, like a Tibetan demon. I was like, whoa, this is strong. This is really strong.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Because I'm a London boy. So, I've done everything as a scientific experimentation, see what works and what it's all about without any kind of negative consequences. So I kind of knew my drugs, so to speak. And so I was like, whoa, this is strong. And actually, it was so strong that I couldn't stand up. I spied a tent in the garden, and I said, I need some privacy because I'm about to collapse because it's so strong, this energy. So I went into the tent, I took my glasses off, and I just began to kind of convulse. And then suddenly there was this IMAX 360 vision above me, below me, behind me, the whole thing. I'd never seen a kind of visionary state like that before. And I was like, whoa, this is really serious. This is not recreational. This is like something major. And so those visions died down, and they were morphing in geometric figures and everything like that. And then the visions died down, and I was left in total darkness. And then within the darkness, I felt this presence. And it was the presence of a supremely intelligent being. I was no longer the most intelligent person in his body, right? So I had an epiphany. I went, oh my God, I didn't just take a liquid or a chemical or a drug. I took into my body a living spirit. And then telepathically, I received this message that said, let us show you what happens when you die, after you die. And suddenly I was in a state of consciousness, of pure consciousness without a form, without a body, without a container. Mm-hmm. And it was infinite. And the funny thing is, I said to myself, I remember this. I remember this state. How can it be that I actually know what it's like to have, to no longer be in a body? And then it just all came to me. I went, oh my God, the Tibetans know what they're talking about. And hey, reincarnation is a real thing. So, the body may fall away, but the spirit is eternal. So that was a massive learning off the boot, for the first time.
Yeah. So it's interesting, the experience. You can't really explain to someone what it is. I mean, you can explain an idea. It's like saying an astronaut saying, "Well, this is what it's like on the moon." You go, "Yeah, well, I can understand that," but you can't really until you're there. And
it's such a threshold experience. It's huge, basically.
It is, and it's. I think I did it a couple of times, and then I always remember it. I remember you coming up to me saying, "I see who you are. Would you like to work?" And I'm like, "What?" And it's like, you saw that I was a healer. And then I sat with someone, and I just knew what to do. So that's why I refer to it as an activation. And I know I have respect for anyone that steps into that space, and a lot of respect for anyone that goes into that space like you do, mm-hmm. like a calling, because many times after the first 3 or 4, I'm going, I am never drinking that again. I am never drinking that. It tastes worse every time I take, and it's just the worst taste ever, right? In fact, I had one night that if I drank it, I thought, right, if my life depended on this, I had to drink it, I would rather be shot, because I couldn't do it. And I tried and I couldn't do it. So it was like, so you get this really hard, it's not a recreational, I don't even like calling it a drug, medicine, experience, whatever you want to call it. It depends what you define as a drug, something that alters your natural state or something like that.
Well, let me just interrupt you here and just say in the beginning, my initial experiences, at least for the first 3 or 4 months, was to regard it as a sacrament, because I was being taken into such high dimensional spaces and given such really beautiful lessons that I didn't see it, because a drug to me is escapist, and it's not necessarily grounded in anything particularly. It's just sensations. But these were definite information and knowledge and connection to the transcendent, or the divine, or the numinous, or whatever you like to call it. But it was definitely a level above 3D reality. So for me, I regarded it as a religious, in a sense, or a spiritual experience. And over time, I've seen it more as a medicine, because it's both a sacrament and a medicine, because it can really heal a person at levels that normal medicine, it sounds like a beer advert, but it can reach the parts that normal medicines can't, because there's a dimension to the human being, which is spiritual, or of consciousness. And pure biomedicine with focusing on the body or focusing on the mind doesn't quite get there.
Well, I know there's a few people out there that still, no matter what you say, will say it's a drug. So if we agree on the fact that it's a substance that alters your consciousness,
definitely,
that's middle ground. And it, it takes you to some really tough places, and things I've seen in there have been, kind of challenging to say the least. And
why were they challenging though? That's the question.
Challenging.
Why is it tough?
Is as much when you see people that suffer, especially when I've been holding space, because the majority of the times I've been in that environment, either with yourself or with other people, a lot of it's been about holding space and doing the healing work. And when you see people in that sort of pain and suffering, I suppose you don't want to see it, but then having the ability to interact with them and help facilitate that healing process is, and there's been some nights that are so tough. There's some nights that have been so tough when I'm working with you that it's just, for people who've been there, they'll understand what I'm saying. For people that don't, they won't. Just information everywhere. The energy is just like, oh my God. It's like trying to surf underwater when I'm not used to the energy, when I wasn't used to it. And I'm like, so you're working with someone, you're doing all this healing with someone, and you're like, oh God, that's exhausting. And then you finish it, and then somebody else pops up and you do it all over again. And you think, oh my God. But then on the other side of that, there's been some absolutely incredible, blissful, beautiful spiritual moments that, just connect you to source. Like I wouldn't, I couldn't even describe. And that has been worth it without a doubt. And I did 33 ceremonies in, I think, 15 months. And I knew when it was time not to do any more. But that was my personal journey. So I suppose the question is, what has the work done for you on a personal level?
I think I've grown in so many different ways and to so many different levels that it's very hard for me to, and it's been so organic, it's very hard for me to quantify that in a very simple statement. I think it's made me very much more appreciative of the complexity of human existence, mm-hmm. and the challenges that we face and the sufferings that we bear and the conundrums we place ourselves in. Sometimes the healing is actually quite easy. It's just a question of realizing that we ourselves construct these traps, if that makes any sense to you, that we ourselves create these problems for ourselves, that it's just a question of looking beyond that and going, I don't have to engage with this little loop that I'm in. I can choose not to do that. So human beings are fantastically complex, and some of the it's given me appreciation for the dimensions from where their suffering comes from. So some people, they are carrying the burdens of the past that isn't from their biography, but it's from their ancestral lineage. That the sufferings of their grandfathers and the grandmothers and great grandfathers, etc., that goes down quite a long. They can still carry those burdens, but because it didn't happen in their lifetime, they don't have the resources to deal with it. It's like this huge stone that they're carrying, and sometimes the medicine can reach back, or the intelligence of the plants can reach back to that very primary or primal trauma and help release that, and then one in this lifetime is no longer burdened with that and no longer having to carry that. So that's there's an appreciation for, how to say, the exquisiteness of the metaphysical condition, in terms of there are so many things that we can, and levels that we can work at, that actually do have a reality and tangibility. It sounds a little bit woohoo-ish, but it's actually really true, and it does. That's why shamans, they can recognize things that happen to human beings that we have no language for, or we have no descriptions for. So for example, a great one is soul retrieval. Shock. When people go through trauma, often a part of their consciousness splits off. It's like a safety fuse in order to protect them. They continue to live, but there's a bit missing. Let's say there's a car accident. Often, in that split second, there is, this intense energy, and in order to protect themselves, there's this little bubble, and so part of them it remains in that time and space and doesn't move on, and the rest of their consciousness moves on. Mm-hmm. But that part is never available anymore. So people often say, and X happened, and I was never the same again. So they're actually verbalizing a sensation in their body that they don't know what it is exactly. They've got no framework. But what shamans do is they can actually go to that time and space and pull that part back and put it back into the body and consciousness of the person. So there's a whole description of a condition that traditional Western medicine doesn't have, because it doesn't recognize spirit, it doesnn't recognize consciousness in that way. And so people have massive transformations after they get that part of them back. So the soul splitting or soul part splitting can happen at any age. Very often people are traumatized as children and they carry on as adults, but they're only half the potential that they really carried initially. And so when you bring that potential back, they're suddenly a different person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, and it's understanding that theory and then actually experiencing it in the ceremonies with you, and also experiencing it from a different way in the way I work with energies and frequencies. And we're noticing that energy and information, if we call it as information, is the thing that unites everything. Is that information is stored in various different ways and is accessed in various different ways, and how we access that information. So, a psychotherapist would work it, it's this trauma and this is how it works. Somebody who does somatic body work could do it through, it's stored in the body here. So it's all different levels of where this information is stored. And so it's interesting how we're kind of doing the same work, or lots of people are doing the same work, but from a different perspective. And I think, the more we understand how this structure is mapped out, and the things that we are stored are not necessarily us. I mean, we can bring this in as a contract, that's meant to happen. We're meant to learn that lesson. But I think it's important that people, especially people who are doing the healings, go through some sort of process so they actually understand it from an experiential point of view. And they can
the people actually facilitating. You have to go on your own journey, and it has to be deep, because you can only take people as far as you've gone. If you haven't done it, if you haven't faced your darkness and your shadow and all the bump that goes with that, you're not really much use to anybody else. Yeah,
and it's so you mentioned shaman there. What is the? Because I was lucky enough to go to, lucky or unlucky, I went to Iquitos in the Amazon, and I didn't drink medicine there. I went and I managed to see someone who was showing us around the Amazon, and it was beautiful Amazon jungle, but it was offset by the bugs and the bites and everything else. But it was an experience, and I'm glad I went. But you mentioned a shaman. What's the difference between a shaman and a curandero?
Let me define what a shaman is first, so we can tackle the curandero. So shamanistic abilities happen in all cultures, and they've happened across all times, and it's essentially the ability to as you mentioned frequencies earlier on, life is a whole spectrum of frequencies, and consciousness is a whole spectrum of frequencies. So you and I and the people listening to this podcast right now, we're in our normal attentive frequency, which is beta brainwaves, which is to pay attention to the everyday. If you go into a relaxed mode, which is alpha, you're watching television or you're slightly relaxed, that's alpha. And then we drop into an even deeper state, which is more meditative, which is theta, and then deep sleep, which is delta. So there's the whole bunch of frequencies that we can we go through anyway. Every day we go from deep sleep to waking and all that. But what shamans do is they can focus in and become masters of certain frequencies that enable them to alter their consciousness so that they can access different realms. So these kind of frequencies and informational states, they can go there at will. They have to practice. Some people naturally fall into this, and sometimes they're overwhelmed by what they see and what they experience, because they don't have the navigational skills to explore that territory. But a shaman is somebody who, through a variety of means, either through dancing or drumming or plant medicine, they're able to access these states, and they're able to navigate, and they're able to get information from these states. Very often a shaman has an ally. An ally could be a spirit animal, or it could even be plants that work together. But the shaman, it's never really heard that a shaman works by themselves, like it's an egoic thing, like, look at me, I'm the great person. They have alliances and wisdom keepers that help them explore these territories and bring back the information, and often do the healing. So when I'm actually in the ceremony, I'm not going, I'm the big guy, I know what I'm doing. It's often I'm getting a message, do this person needs this, or you need to, and sometimes spontaneously, because I'm in the flow of the mystery. Sometimes I'm singing something, it shifts, and it's not necessarily me singing. It's coming, the energetic of the medicine is coming through me, saying this needs to happen now. And so I'm not trying to analyze and control and make sure that I'm getting it all correct. I'm allowing myself to trust that together with the plants that I have relationships with, that the thing is being held in the proper way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's similar to. Can I just ask you to shuffle to your other side? That's it. So you're central, yeah, for everyone. When we do split screen, we send. It's very similar to the way I work in regards to the fact that it's channeling information. You are a vessel for that, and it's so yeah. And I noticed that another thing worth talking about is the Icaros, because I know that when you start singing, it's not that you've got a bad voice in any way, but suddenly I feel like I want to vomit. But if you explain to people what that is about, and because it's frequency again, it's sound frequency, it's the voice, and it's powerful, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So all our medicines across the world are based on plants, whether it's if it's leaves or roots or flowers or petals or whatever it is, it all comes from there. So we use the physical nature of the plant, but there's another level of medicine that is available from the plants, that is their awareness. Now I know this is maybe for some people it's a new concept or a different concept, and it's not very common as an available medicine, but some societies or some cultures have learned to recognize that everything is alive, everything has spirit, and those spirits can be utilized as partners for healing. And of course, the most powerful and oldest beings on our planet are the plants. They've been here 500 million years on the earth itself, not just on the oceans, but on the earth, creating oxygen and helping to sustain the whole life cycles and evolution. So they know a thing or two. So and there are certain plants within the plant kingdom that are willing to be ambassadors, to bridge the gap or the chasm between the human domain and the plant domain, and are willing to help us to evolve, to heal us and to teach us. And so the notion is that we can draw upon the intelligence, the awareness, the consciousness of the plant in order to facilitate our own healing and to facilitate the healing and teachings of others. So in order to become a practitioner in the plant spirit medicine tradition, one has to have a relationship with the plant or the plants that one works with, and that comes through time. So we often imbibe, but let's say the medicine of rose or the medicine of lily or the medicine of oak, we imbibe a little bit of that plant, and we practice not eating certain things, having sexual prohibitions, not being sexual, excluding social media consumption, this kind of isolation period in order to accumulate the wisdom and transmissions from this plant. So then what happens, let's say I did a month with rose and I go into a ceremony and I open my mouth. When I'm singing, it's not just my vibration of me as an individual, it's the vibration of the medicine, the energetic of the rose medicine that is coming through, and that's what's impacting the person. There are certain shamans out there, as soon as they open their mouth, the frequency is so high and so potent that everybody in the room instantly purges. It's that kind of it's such a catalyst, and it's quite remarkable to see, So that's what's happening, and that's why when somebody is coming from ego and says, I'm a magnificent guitar player and a singer or whatever, and I can do this, I can learn the songs, blah, blah, blah. No, because they don't actually carry the connection. They don't carry the medicine within their voice. They don't have that relationship. They can pass off a performance, but they're not actually bringing the medicine into the space. They're not actually invoking the energetics and have a relationship so that the plants are willing to work with that person. So the space is much, much wilder, and it's almost like, somebody's got a toy boat and says, I can direct the Titanic. So to speak.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's the power of frequency. It's that the information travels through, the data becomes information. The information travels through the frequency. So also, just going back a little bit, so we define shaman, and the word curandero keeps coming up within these circles. So briefly, what's the difference between the two?
Well, technically, a curandero. So, I would not call myself a curandero because that's a very specific tradition. That if somebody has a specific physical illness, the curandero will know exactly which plants to take for that condition, and that's a very long training. I'm very proficient at holding as an ayahuasquero the space for the successful execution of ceremony, but I would not, if you came to me and I said, I've got this condition, I would not be able to diagnose you because I'm not a specialist in that. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So yeah, that's so. I'm a ayahuasquero, but I'm not a curandero.
And is it right? Some of these shamans, in the indigenous cultures, they're training from the ages of like 8, 9, 10 years old. It's a lifelong commitment, and I mean, it's just incredible the dedication they have, and hopefully that's not going to be lost as we evolve and move forward, or de-evolve in some cases. But yeah, I think that culture is definitely needed, and it's interesting that when people have a psychosis in this culture, it's it's frowned upon, and it's you've got to get psychological help, and in them cultures it's revered in a lot of ways, because it's a different perspective that they're looking at, and it's I think a healthy integration between the cultures, between the knowledge bases of what's happening between science, the old ways and the new ways. I think that's the way forward, and not to lose some of this valuable information, these valuable ways of working that have been cultivated over thousands of years, really.
It's interesting you say that you bring this example up, because we don't really know what to do with psychosis, because we label it as mental illness. But within a traditional society, when somebody has such an experience, they may see it as a calling to become a practitioner, to become a shaman, basically, because the spirits or the ancestors are calling them. This is very often the case. It's called shamanic illness. And I'm an anthropologist by training, and I was in Tanzania near Kilimanjaro, and I met a medicine man, and he told me a classic story, and it's this: the ancestors came to him, and they said, "We want you to be, a shaman." And he said no. He flat out refused, because he knew it's a very arduous and thankless task in some ways. And they said, right, well, we're gonna put you in bed for a year, and then we'll come back in a year and see how you're doing. So they made him poorly, because he wasn't following the will of the ancestors. And so he went to the hospital and had all the normal checks, and nothing, nothing came up. They said, you're perfectly fine. So they came back at the end of the first year, and they said, well, how about now? And he flat out refused again. They said, see you next year, right? So by the time the second year rolled round, and he was like, he couldn't work, he was dependent on his family, he was immobilized. They said, how about now? And he said, all right then.
I'll give in.
Right then. So, I mean, that's not quite a psychosis, but when I was in Taiwan, there was a young lady who was 14, and the thing is that in Taiwan there were 15 indigenous tribes. They weren't all Chinese. They were more like Filipinos, Austro-Malaysians, and they had their rich indigenous culture. And this young girl was having the visions, and she was having all these experiences, 14 years old. But because the Christians had come, they so overlaid that traditional culture, they so wiped it out, that they had lost that connection. And what she was having was exactly that. She was getting the calling, but the only way the mother can handle it was to say, you must be mentally ill, and she got her medicated. Whereas if in a traditional society, they would have known what to have done with that, and they would have initiated a whole training so she could basically channel those talents.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did a retreat recently, and a few of the participants, quite a few of them, have activated, because that's what the job is, to activate them to these frequencies. And they're experiencing, it's not unpleasant, they're experiencing body tremors, they're getting information, some of people are seeing guides, and it's brilliant. But if that was to happen to somebody spontaneously, and they're in an environment where people would suggest that they are mentally ill, I could see how quickly, and I'm sure there's lots of people in psychiatric, I worked as a psychiatric nurse for a while as well, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are in there that are just actually started to spiritually awake, and then suddenly they've been medicated. So I think there's a place for both. I don't think if they haven't got the spiritual tools to deal with them, then the ways that psychotherapists are working at the moment, and some of the medication that's used is probably necessary, because that's the only thing they've got, really. But I think as things develop, things are going to change. And one of the things you said there, you said about vision, and it'd be interesting to distinguish for the people that are watching this and listening to this, what the difference is between a vision and a hallucination.
That's a good. Very often within the plant medicine experience, one gets the visions. And the thing is that they're basically a signpost to indicate that you're now moving outside the realm of 3D. Okay, so it's almost like saying we're now going transdimensional. And so excuse me 1 second. My alarm.
It's the universe calling you.
And so there's a lot of information that can be transmitted through these images and geometric forms or ancient icons or even mathematical formulas. So lots of information can be coming. And sometimes if we try and parse that or make sense of that with our brains, it's not for our brains. So here's part of the challenge of working with plant spirit medicine, that information comes in many different ways. We are very used to this kind of analog speaking and making sense and this kind of thing, but our entire body speaks many different languages: the language of the bones, the language of the blood, the language of hormones. It speaks all kinds of different kind of communication styles. So the plant spirit medicine can actually download a lot of different mediums and information in different ways that is not necessarily for our cognitive process to make sense of, but it's received by the whole body. It's just a question of being a receptacle to allow that to happen. And then sometimes the information percolates and cascades over days, and then we start to get insights, if that makes sense. Now sometimes messages come through, visions come through, and if they're a big vision, it's a big message, I like to hear it or see it 3 times to ascertain that it has some validity, rather than, I saw that I was, Napoleon in a past life, or, those kind of things that need to be repeated in order to have some validation. Perhaps I am Napoleon, but I'll need to see it 3 times to make sure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that reminds me of a story. A good friend of ours, Jean, who I spoke to recently, absolutely wonderful human being, and she won't mind me saying that one time we were in ceremony, and she saw this roundabout vision, not hallucination, a vision, and she's there, she's lovely, she's sat up, and she's like, see this, and the giving gifts, have this gift, have this gift, have this gift, and She answered the question. What's the question now? There's a question that you asked 3 times.
Are you medicine for me?
Yeah, that was it. So because we'd already prepped her on the fact that that's what you say, and she went, "Are you medicine?" And you go on, have this gift, and there's all these things going around. Have this gift. Are you medicine? Are you medicine? The 3rd time, said it just changed and it just evaporated, and it wasn't. So it's like that was a good way of working, and I noticed the transformations in her life since being introduced to this. So it's very interesting how your framework, coming from that experience, that understanding of plant work, is I can see the correlations between the way my model of the universe, based on what Tom Campbell teaches, and how they all connect at certain levels. So that's been beneficial for me to go into that arena and pull out the information and say, oh, well, that's how you're working. And, same with psychology, that's how you're working. And to see the commonality and how the structure of the universe is actually working through. And one of the things that I said to people is that, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, but I would say that when people go into these plant medicines, sometimes they believe that's what this other reality is, but you're experiencing it through the consciousness of the plant. It's like you put the glasses on over. And one of the things that I was taught is to own it yourself, to be able to get to these states without having to take this. And this was the journey that I wanted to take. And the medicine takes you to the top of the mountain. It shows the view and it's incredible, but it drops you back down again. And you've got to start doing the work. But at least you know what you're working towards now.
I agree with you. I think it's a beautiful overview. It says, look, this is the potential. This is what's out there. It's up to you to find your own way there, in a sense. You've got to build the tools and have the toolbox to be able to build that into your daily life. Don't expect that you can take this one time and then you're suddenly enlightened and you don't have to resolve. It's a bit like a Mark Zuckerberg brand change. You gotta fix the problems, back at the ranch before you rebrand yourself. You can't. There are no shortcuts. Essentially, you have to do the work.
Yeah.
And it is hard work. I mean, if somebody is going, oh, I've heard of this thing, and it's on my bucket list, I say be very careful, because it's very tough.
It is a bucket list, because most of the night you spent looking in the bottom of a bucket while you're being sick. Because the purging is something that you do to release the energy into it one way or another, and it's not.
Some people are a bit scared of that, but it's a sign that you're getting better, because you're releasing the things you don't need, and they go, oh, but I don't like to be sick under normal circumstances, and I go, well, that's because it's usually alcohol related or food poisoning or flu, and no one likes that. But this is actually the medicine saying it's time to get rid of this, and it's a very quick process, and it's painless. It's just like boom, off you go. You don't need this anymore in your life.
One of the questions then would say, for me, I was definitely told you need to step away from this now. You need to go on your own path, and I've met people who've had 200 ceremonies, and they're still full of ego, they're still full of fear, they're still full of anger, and so two questions are: one is that the importance of integration. People aren't integrating, or how to integrate, and is there a time where you would recommend people go, okay, enough's enough. You've got to start climbing yourself now.
So integration is the key. It's not really about what happens in ceremony, even though that's important. It's about what you do with that information. Like I said, if you purge, you've created space for something to be restructured. But if you do the same old thing that you've been doing before, the same old patterns, the same old partying, the same old relationships, nothing's going to change. So ultimately, the homework is to implement what you've learned. It's not just to notch up another session on some imaginary list. It's to say I've done the work thoroughly, and that means after the sessions to listen to the messages, the integrations that are being transmitted, and to take action on them. They may be a small thing, like a stupid thing, like eat more carrots. You go, how is this a major thing? But it's a tiny deviation from the course you set originally, and it's a tiny improvement. Mm-hmm. And those incremental 1% or 0.5% changes actually end up in a whole different direction and a whole different kind of quality of life if followed through consistently. But I agree with you, doing 200 sessions and not integrating anything is just pointless.
So when would you advise people, or when did the people? I mean, I knew instinctively that I don't need to do this anymore. In fact, I almost felt it would be detrimental in regards to my own journey.
Your own pathway, yes, exactly.
Because I cannot develop to be able to get to that level without ayahuasca or plant medicines if I'm still taking it. So that was
exactly
it. You've got to give it up now. So,
but it was amazing, because it was a really powerful, a hugely powerful activation for you, which set you on the path, and then it served a purpose. And then when it was no longer of value, you knew, you said, oh, okay, we don't need to do this anymore.
Yeah, and people ask me, they say, they go, oh, somebody's doing this ceremony. First is that who is holding space? That is vitally important. Who are they? And why do you want to do it? What is the calling? Is it really necessary? And I think you probably agree that it calls you. It just keeps showing up. It's like hello, hello, and before you know it, you just sat there. You're sitting going, I've got a bucket in front of me. I'm sat, and there's somebody over there singing, Icaros. How did I get here? And it's the universe intervenes. So yeah, I think the importance of holding space correctly is so paramount, because it is serious when you're in there, and there are good energies and there are not so good energies, and it's not that people need to be in fear, they just need to be aware. It's like having a bouncer at the door of a club, isn't it?
Oh, it's like a ship that's going through the troughs and the waves, and it's a bit of a swell. You need somebody at the helm who knows what they're doing. Who can steer the ship properly. Otherwise, it's going to list and sink, basically. So yeah, like you said earlier, some of the psychological states that can emerge, that need to emerge, are really non-ordinary. And it's at times, when you have a bunch of people going through altered states, extraordinary experiences, peak experiences, it can be a little bit like bedlam. It can be very seemingly chaotic. And yet an experienced facilitator can call everybody back to the harbor. And that's the important thing, that then, although it looks from the outside, so if you were to look as an observer, you go, whoa, this is very, very strange. But actually, somebody who knows what they're doing can actually normalize this and make it safe. Hang on.
It's all happening at your end, isn't it?
So, but then again, from when, I'm sure you'll agree with me, Trevor, that from now you've had all these experiences. If you look at what mainstream life is the propaganda for how to live on this planet, you go, actually, we're the crazy ones. The normal definition of normality and how we are existing or coexisting with all life forms on this planet is not quite in balance. It's a bit mental.
well, I remember I spent a lot of time in front of computers, and, Arcturian, you know what I'm like, in front of computers and technology. I love tech. And I remember when I flew over to the Amazon, and I flew down by myself, and they give this little plane that looks like something out of Indiana Jones that's going to crash at any minute, and a really bad sandwich as you fly into it. And I saw the Amazon for the first time, and I just teared up. I was like, oh my God, this is the lungs of the planet, and I really felt it, really saw it. And I'm like, God, this is so amazing. And and then spent quite a few days there, staying in this village, and they pull the bed back and all these bugs run everywhere, and you're like, oh well, I'm here now. So, and there was the guy that was whose house we're staying at. I say house, it's just a shack, a hut, with no electric or anything. It was and he was in his 40s. He's happy. He's smiling. I mean, literally, I didn't seem unhappy all the time. And we went fishing, and we stood in this boat. Sat in this boat, and he's just got this little cane, and he's got this little bit of wire sticking off the end, and he catches a fish, and then he catches another fish, and he catches another fish. And I'm doing exactly the same as him, exactly the same, but obviously I wasn't, because I never caught a single fish. And he was happy. He was in great shape. I mean, I'm saying, like, full abs, everything, not an ounce of fat on him, and he's like, he's happy. And then I looked, I thought, God, what am I doing with all that technology? I didn't even miss it. At all. And he was the happiest person I think I've met. And I didn't speak Spanish, and he didn't speak English, but we communicated, and there was other people there as well. And it just really made you come back and think, oh my God, look at the way we are sheep being driven, through our food, through our media, through just everything is we're not even, I think we've just lost touch with who we are. And I think when you do these plant medicines, or you start working on your spiritual development, it's the first thing you start noticing. You start being awake and knowing things, and being aware of what is serving you and what is not serving you, and what is, and sometimes that can be challenged, especially when people are not having the same experience as you and not seeing it from the same perspective. They can suddenly start labeling you as freaky, as conspiracy theorists, or out there. But then what happens is you just find a group of people that are just as wacky as you, and just as awake as you, and then your life starts expanding, which is what it's about. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've had so many experiences. Firstly, I think you should write a book, but that's something else. And secondly, what is one of the most interesting experiences you've had while being on the medicine?
Very simply, how do I say this without sounding completely crazy? But very simply is to look at to be given the vision of the algorithm of creation, to see the actual mechanics behind all of creation, to see that it is an endlessly, endlessly forming mathematical formula. It's like looking at the eyes of God, basically. And when that happened, when I actually visually saw that, there was a deep resonance and a recognition. I already knew this because we're all made of these algorithms, right? Everything around us is made of this algorithm. So it's almost like God seeing God. Forgive me for saying this, but it's recognizing the divine, and then laughing, going, "Oh, I know this." But it's also at the same time, I need to say this. There are people who want to know everything. There are people who are in search of the ultimate, right? And the medicine can go there with you, but it can be too much for the human mind to process if it's not ready. And in fact, I've had a conversation with the intelligence of the medicine, and it says, look, we want to give you everything. But if we gave you everything, you're not vibrationally attuned to the energetic of that information, and it would be too much for your biological form to process. You need to do it step by step. You need to be able to almost like ramp up your internal voltage so that you can handle the quality of this information. So there was one guy very early in my experiences, he wanted to know everything. I said, be very careful what you ask for. And he got to a point where he was shown something, and then he was tested. They say, if you want to continue this journey, you need to step through this threshold. And he balked at that. He didn't have the courage to do that. And then when he came out of the experience, he was in a halfway place. He hadn't fully integrated the entire experience, which is what he asked for, and yet he was no longer comfortable in the ordinary world. So he was in a very hard place, and he ended up having to tranquilize himself and medicate himself with tranquilizers, simply because it's almost like saying, knocking on God's door and you're nearly there, but you don't quite have the balls to go the full distance. And so he had to, I think he spent 3 months in tranquilizers because the ordinary world was just no longer working for him. But if he'd done what he had to do, he would have been able to have the full integration. But, so that's why I say be very modest in what you ask for and allow it to be revealed to you step by step according to your journey. Don't go for the ultimate of the ultimate, because unless you've got the full training and capacity, it's going to blow you up, essentially.
Yeah, it's a bit like explaining quantum physics to a fish, really, isn't it? I mean, it's not it's not going to be beneficial, and I think with all expansion like this, it's a process, and it's the ego that wants to know more. It's the ego that wants to see what's over the next ridge, the next brow, and accepting where we are at.
Which is okay. I mean, there's people. Okay, so let me be very clear here. People ask me, "Is this addictive?" And I go, look, even for me, taking that the next cup in the series is hard work. There's no way it's physically addictive. We really struggle with this. But psychologically, it's very interesting, because once you open the portal to higher dimensions, of course, if you're any kind of intelligent person, you're going to want to know what the landscape is and how it's structured. So there is a little bit of like, what's the next level kind of possibility of wanting to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So,
but again, like you said, just going to interrupt you, sorry, but like you said, you'll know when you've reached enough, and you have to integrate that. It's not this constant quest for ever and ever. I mean, I in my first 3 months, I was shown so many levels, and then suddenly the visions turned off. I was no longer given access to the visions, and I thought, oh, what's happened here? And the intelligence said to me, I said, why are there no visions? They said, do you want television?
Yeah.
Do you want to be entertained? That's not the learning. It's not about just being shown things. It's about much more than that. Much more wisdom aspects.
Well, that's an interesting parallel, because one of the people I work with, and it's called Elizabeth Rose, and she's a clear channel, and she was experiencing. She was saying that when she woke up, when she was activated, shall I say, the angel stepped in, and she was really psychic before. She could do outer bodies and she could do all these things. And suddenly they stopped it. That's it. You're a channel. So she brings through amazing information. And I noticed that when I was younger, I was having outer body experiences, and I was doing all this, and I'd meditate and I'd see visions and stuff. And since my awakening, really, activation, I create these meditations for people, and they experience everything, like beings talking to them, vibrations and expansions and whole movies going on. And I sit there in darkness. I meditate for like an hour. I don't see a thing, just darkness. Don't feel anything, just darkness. And it is literally like, it's like being a chef and not being able to taste your own food. But there's a reason why.
There's a reason why.
Because we get distracted. We're like, oh yeah, we don't really want to talk to you. I'm going to surf the universe. Why would I want to empty your sick bucket? It's, So yeah, and maybe in time, they'll come in. But it's a joint effort, and we are part of the system. We are part of God experiencing itself. And I think a lot of people in the religious belief systems would be quite kind of opposed to that. But this is the journey. The truth is the truth, and we all find our own version of that truth. And
I'd like to say that my perspective is that I have nothing to teach anybody. All I ask people is to be open-minded to what emerges and to discover the truth for themselves, because that's the strongest form of truth that anyone can experience, is when they've actually gone through it themselves. Then they'll know, and then we can talk thereafter. We can confer and corroborate. But I don't want to pre-program people and say, oh, this is the cosmology, or these are the beings, because go and find out, and then you'll know, and then we can talk. So religion often formalizes things and then says it becomes orthodoxy, and if you move away from this vision or this received truth, then we're going to persecute you. It's just ridiculous, really.
Yeah, and it's I think, the spiritual journey, the spiritual unfolding, I think it is a very personal, it's our personal path, it's our personal journey. And if we can have people to share that journey, that's great, but ultimately we are our own experience, and that's something that we have to take responsibility, the ability to respond to and to move forward, and to also measure your success as well, measure your journey, because a lot of the times we always look for how we can improve, and sometimes it's good to just take stock and go, wow, this is how I was 5 years ago, this is how I was 10 years ago, look how much I've changed. And to measure your progress, I think, is an important part of anything that you do, really.
So you know where I'm going to go with this then.
Yeah.
So how have you changed since your activation?
My life's completely changed. If I was to put at the top of the pyramid, I've become more loving to myself and to other people. It's been a journey of just extraordinary, really. And my whole life is about this now. It's about serving others in service. And I'm still working on myself on a, if not daily basis, going through these processes. And so, yeah, it's discovering who I am, what my gifts are, how I can serve others, how I can guide others, and stepping into that as well, because a lot of the times you don't step into your own. I don't even like to use the word power. Power, for me, it gives the idea that you are taking control and power over something else or someone else. I'd say your sovereignty is a better word. Stepping into your sovereignty rights, who you are as a person, and what you have to give to people. And that could be, having a coffee shop and serving teas and cakes and making people feel good, a space where they want to come to. That could be,
that's a gift.
It's a gift, and we all have this ability. We all have the ability to be kind to other people, to ourselves first, more to ourselves, and then to other people. And to share that through our whatever we do, through its art, through its music, through its design, clothes, whatever you do, stepping into holding space. And I think it's important that people find what their gifts are, and ultimately it helps them become a better person, and your life becomes calmer. And even when things do happen in your life, which you get sucker punched, some stuff just happens out of nowhere, you have a different perspective, and you can go, you know what, it's all right, because we're on a rock spinning through space, living in a simulation. We're eternal beings. Can't be that bad. It's only a parking ticket. It's like, so, and see everything as a lesson. So I think the big thing is my perspective has changed, and through working with yourself, through working with people like Tom Campbell, Elizabeth, and many other people that have been on my path, and I'll say I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I truly thank you for allowing me, trusting me to step into that space as a healer, because I know when you hold space, it's a very sacred place, and you're very careful at who you allow. Shamans generally, who you allow to interact with your clients and participants, and I know there was a trusting and a knowing there, and I'm grateful for that, because that was my training ground to go, okay. And I'm still learning. I'm still picking things up and going, I was taught that in episode 14 of my ayahuasca. I was taught that. I see how that comes in to do with intention.
It's amazing, isn't it? There are kind of little lesson droplets that actually flower later on in time.
It's an unpacking, really, because all this downloads comes in. It's like, I always say, it's like the amount of furniture moved into the house doesn't correlate to the amount of furniture that's in the house. You're like, there's removal vans coming with loads of stuff. I'm like, where's all this information coming in?
But you're a multidimensional being, so it's not necessarily a physical space.
So what's happened is the information comes in. This happens in the work that I do with people, and Samantha I work with as well. She does the same thing. The information comes in. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it's just lies there. Sometimes it'll get activated later through codes and things. It'll get activated when you're in a geographical space. It'll get activated when you meet someone at a specific time, or when another piece of knowledge comes together and clicks in. So it's this constant awareness, unpacking and rediscovering. So yeah, it's never ending, just like we're never ending. But it's also important for us to enjoy the space between, and to go, you know what,
life, to actually live life. Rather, to be on a spiritual mission is quite tiring and quite boring, actually. And it's life itself is the spiritual teaching, the nitty-gritty of everyday existence, rather than chasing unicorns and rainbows. It's just like, how do you treat people, how do you treat yourself, how do you relate to nature? Really simple things. And let me just say that I think my role, obviously I'm Western and I'm trained within the Western tradition, but I try, and I'm also conversant with the indigenous people view, the Peruvian Amazonian worldview, but I translate things so that people can relate to it, that it's simple, that it's not, airy fairy, although there are magical realms and higher dimensional realms and all kinds of fantastic things, but I want to make it simple, and I want to make it accessible, and I want to make it understandable. So that's important, rather than creating this woohoo, this atmosphere of new age glitter around it. I want it to be something that can be practical within people's lives. And the thing is that what really gives me great joy, to be honest, is when people come and then 6 months later I'll connect with them and say, how are you doing? And they say, like, everything has changed. That, or to see the degree of the transformation in their lives and so many levels and how it's impacted. And I go, well, that's the most beautiful, beautiful gift that this medicine can give me. And that's why I continue to do it, because it's not something like, it's all from my wishful thinking and we're all happy clappy and everyone's happy and carried along this energetic wave of we all did this thing together. There are actually tangible results that make it worthwhile.
Yeah, and I agree. And I always, always check up on people and keep contact as much as possible and say, how are you? What's happening? Measure the work that you've done, the interaction you've done as well. And so yeah, it is medicine. It is healing, and whenever there's healing, there's comfort before that. And ultimately, the ironic thing is that we're all on this journey, whether you realize it or not. We've all got to get our boots on and climb the mountain. It's just the way it is.
We've got to get our booty on.
Yeah. So we have some fun as well. We've had some real laughs in that space. I remember just some crazy stuff. I remember the otorongo, the jaguar. And for those, I don't expect you to believe it, but for those that have experienced it, basically, the energy comes in. The spirit of the jaguar came in, and it's done it a few times. And the jaguar is about mulching energy up into it, and so it's sort of transformative. And it comes into my body, and it's not freaky. It's not like, it doesn't scare me, but then I become the jaguar. And I'm like, snarling, and I'm moving like a jaguar. I'm like, I can feel what it feels like to be a jaguar. It's beautiful. And then you'll get a big chunk of energy near someone and then just start mulching it up. And I remember one time, I couldn't stop following you around. It's like, you would come on, here, boy, having a laugh. And there's a great respect, when you're in that state, you have great respect for yourself as space holder. So it's nice to have a laugh, but I could not stop myself. I was just moving like a jaguar, following you around the room, going. So and another time where the energy put my head in a bucket. There's a bucket on the floor, and it just put my head in the bucket, and I couldn't stop it. And there's a sense of humor there, which I think is well worth mentioning. The energy's got a sense of humor. So it goes, we'll work hard. It's like a teacher. We'll teach you, but we can have a laugh as well. And I think that's something that, as healers and holding space, I think that's something that's worth embodying, that ability to not just be serious and we are doing this, just to bring joy, bring light, bring laughter, bring yourself into that space.
I absolutely agree with you. It is very serious stuff, and I invest time and money and effort to train to the Amazon every year to improve my craft, and I take it seriously. And in that space, you're working with very delicate parts of human beings, their soul, their spirit, whatever. But at the same time, humor infuses the universe. The divine is having fun at the same time, and we're part of that flow. And so it comes through we can all do the serious work, but we can all enjoy the process. There's no point doing life without enjoyment.
Well, the first message that came through on my experience, on my activation, the message went, stop taking things so seriously. Stop taking things so seriously. That was it. And I'm like, wow. Yeah. Well, I could talk for hours. I think our time's come to an end, but I think we need to revisit this. And, there's so many other things I want to talk about. Iboga, San Pedro, mushrooms, or happy.
All of those.
My bacho. And, there's so much. And I know there's a wealth of knowledge that you've got there. So, briefly then, how can people can connect with you with the website and the email I'm going to give to you shortly. It's going to be on screen. But how can people experience this? How can people work with you?
I travel, so it depends on where they are. And also I'm planning for 2022 to hold some retreats with my teachers in Peru. There'll be 2-week retreats. For those of you in the UK, Peru is coming off the red list, so it's going to be easy to come back without having to do quarantine. So essentially, that's one of the things that I would really invite your listeners to consider, because it's like you mentioned earlier, what's the difference between doing the medicine in the jungle and outside in Western society. You can do powerful work in both conditions, but it's amazing to have the jungle there as support, and the life around you and the birds and the insects actually singing to you during ceremony. It's phenomenal. So it's a whole different experience. So just drop me a line and I'll put you on the mailing list and we'll be in contact, essentially.
And briefly, for those that are, because I get lots of people asking me, somebody's got a church all down the road, they're going to do ayahuasca, should I go? And I'm like, I always tune in and go, no. Would you agree? The main thing is, if you're going to do this, don't do it just for the sake of it. Do it because you are being pulled to it, and to make sure that the space is held correctly, and you're doing it under legal circumstances as well.
Yes, very good advice. Very good advice. You've been a fabulous host. Thank you, Trevor. It's been a delight talking to you.
It's been a delight. Yes. And
let's do a two-parter then.
Yeah, absolutely, two-parter. So I'm going to put your contact information up on screen. And once again, thank you very much. And I'm sure lots of people will enjoy this.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So that's spiritoftheamazon@gmail.com. And it's been a real interesting insight, and I hope you've learned a lot from this, and I'm sure it's going to bring up more questions than anything else. If you want to get in contact with me, this is my Facebook, Energy Healing Vibrations, and my Instagram is The Healing Vibrations. And if you'd like to come on one of the retreats are now running. The next one is going to be in Wales. This is going to be October 2021. So by the time you hear this, you might have already missed it. But head over to my website and you'll know and see more. We'll be doing different countries as well. And we do all sorts of things. But it's basically to bring people online, to activate them, to heal their trauma, and to educate and to guide you and to create a bigger family. And they're called the Awaken Retreats. And so I hope you have enjoyed this episode. And if you'd like to appear on here, you've got something to say, we've got some really interesting guests coming up in the next couple of weeks. And stay in touch. My name's Trevor, and I will see you again. Thank you.